Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Justin Wrench and I will be chairing this meeting. Members, before we begin, can I please remind you that the meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Members, as you can see, we have quite a packed agenda this afternoon, but please note that along with the earlier start time, we have a shorter than usual time slot in which to conduct this meeting due to other scheduled commitments. Therefore, please can I ask that questions raised as we move through the meeting are kept concise. All questions or any questions where responses are unable to be provided in today's meeting will be noted and circulated for a response outside of the meeting. Please can I remind everybody present to turn off their microphones when they have finished speaking. I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting.
What is the deadline, Chair?
6:30, I think, would be more than enough time, but yeah, we'll see how we go. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for the meeting have been received from Councillor Raymond. I don't think we have any more apologies though, do we?
We have no further apologies, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So as there aren't any further apologies, hopefully we'll be joined throughout the meeting through some other members, but I'll now proceed to item 2, declaration of interest. So members, anybody have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Okay, thank you. So there are no declarations, so I'll now move to agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. So since we've had 2 sets of minutes, so please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes as an accurate record of the meetings from the 30th of May and the 21st of April. Councillor Eusden, can I now have a seconder as well, please? Councillor Mann, thank you. So the minutes have been moved and seconded as an accurate record. All those in favour, please indicate by show of hands. Thank you. So just wait one moment while I sign the minutes. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. So agenda item 4, public question time. I can confirm that there are no registered speakers this evening. So we'll now proceed to agenda item 5, the key financial indicators. This report is set out on pages 6 to 11 of the agenda. Can I please invite Phil Myers, Head of Finance, to present his report? Thank you, Phil.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and good evening, good afternoon, members. So this is the standard report on the key financial indicators. So it's looking at the period up to the end of May, so it's quite early in the year, particularly for the financial position. So I'm sure that's going to unfold over the coming months, and we will be doing our first quarter review of the finances and projections for the year. That's currently being worked on by the finance team. So in terms of where we were at the end of May, we were just slightly under our profile in terms of the budget. So 1.1 million net expenditure at the end of May, which is just 17,000 below where we were expected. For salaries or staffing costs, which is the larger proportion of our budget, we were at the end of May just under profile by 52,000. I have included a note there of caution because we are awaiting details of the pay award. So there's been quite a bit of activity going on over the last few weeks and months in terms of regional pay discussions, and that's feeding through into the national employers who are meeting at the end of this month to consider the response back to the pay claim that has already been submitted by the unions. So we will pick that up in subsequent reports, what that means. In terms of commercial rents, so still got a reasonable rate of occupancy at 96%, although it's just slightly shy of profile in terms of income on there. In terms of capital, so we've got having had quite an ambitious capital programme, or certainly a larger capital spend for the last couple of years. It's perhaps slightly moderated at the moment for this year, so we've currently got a programme of just shy of 13 million at the moment, and the main items that are comprised in that are listed. So at the end of May, we'd actually spent against that programme just £1.5 million. As you'll know, there was a decision recently about the Maltings Lane, so that will come through into the programme at the next iteration, so that will increase the planned spend going forward. Capital receipts, so we anticipated in the current year £5.7 million of receipts from a variety of sources. And at the end of May, we've achieved 3.9 million, primarily from sales of serviced land plots up at the Horizon 120 Business Park. In terms of collection rates, these are looking pretty good at the moment. So both council tax and business rate, we're outperforming what we achieved last year. So that's encouraging at this stage of the year. In terms of write-offs, I think we've discussed previously, we have very little write-offs compared with what values we're actually collecting, but nevertheless we do, once we've exhausted all means, we do write-off debts where it's becoming sort of not value for money to continue to chase. So there are information there about write-offs. With our sundry debts, which is our debt other than council tax and business rate, so at the end of May, about 2.9 million. Again, over half of that is housing benefit overpayments, which again I know has been discussed to the committee many times. That's debt that we do recover, but it is a slow process because we are restricted on how much we can claim from the debtors. In terms of supplier payments, so we 97.8% paid within 38 days, so that's exceeding our target. Up to the end of May, we've also exceeded our budget already in terms of our short-term interest rates. With the recent rises in base rate, that has created an upturn in the investment income that we're securing. So 0.69% at that point, and that compared with rate for the whole of last year of 0.08%. So some positive impact there from rising interest rates for us. On our pooled funds at the end of May, because the dividends are paid quarterly, we wouldn't expect to have received many of the dividends yet, but we do anticipate those being on track with what we'd expect. The value of those funds, which are impacted by the stock market prices, that was very good at the end of May. So the unrealised gain we had at the end of May was 3.1 million. But I would just say that we did see quite a large fall off of that as asset prices tumbled in June. But we recognise that there are ups and downs with those values, and that's the reason we've been holding those for the long term. And then there's detail of the council's investment, or a bit more detail of the council's investments in the appendix. So happy to.
No, thank you, Phil, for your detailed report there. Do any members, Councillor Walsh?
Thanks very much for the report and the summary. Just a couple of fairly detailed questions. I think your first point, Phil, was about the National Pay Award, and while that's not settled, I think there was a government announcement the other day. I don't know if that gave any broad indication for local government, but I imagine you've done some sort of scenario planning. He says grandly. I mean, what do you think that might be? And I noticed in the report you said efficiencies of 300k, does that cover labour or other things? And I have one other question, quite a straightforward one. Shall I?
I think if Phil comes
Sure,
to that
yeah.
one first, and then we'll
Fine,
come back
yeah,
to you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of pay, you're right. We have been doing some, I suppose, scenario planning around that rate. Just for context, every 0.25% is roughly around £50,000 on our pay bill. So the budget assumed a 2% provision. We did have a little bit of carryover from 21-22 because the pay award was less. We've looked at some scenarios around a 4%, 7%, and 4% looking at somewhere in the order of £300,000. But I think although the government have made noises around in terms of public sector pay review bodies, just have to remember that local government is outside of that, and that's where the employers bit will feed into that. And I think we'll get a better indication of where the employers are thinking in probably the next few weeks. As they say, they're meeting later this month. But they've been canvassing views, obviously, from councils about affordability, but also recognising that there are those cost of living pressures on staff, and there are issues around things like retention, etc., that councils need to be mindful of. In terms of the 300,000, so that is that's like a corporate efficiency target. I think we've discussed this before. That's in the sort of base budget. So we anticipate there will be some churn within the organisation, movement of staff, vacancies, etc. And so typically that 300,000 has been achieved through the savings we've made in year through that movement. So within this position, we've factored in part of that 300,000 for the first 2 months of the year. So the underspend of 52,000 against profile is sort of net of a proportion of that efficiency, but it's something that we have seen that we've been able to address just through sort of natural churn within the organisation.
And is that from all sources or just labour, and it's all sources efficiencies?
No, it's generally from staffing.
It is from staffing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And your second question, Councillor Walsh?
Thank you. Yes, you've already alluded to this. I think 2.89 million debtors by the end of May, and I think you said it's primarily overpayment of, was it housing benefits? I imagine, again, you'll have looked at that from previous years' experience, because I think you said you can't always get all of that back. You can only go so far. Do you have almost a planning guideline as to how much you get back, and then proportionally, and for what you don't get back, what happens for our budget? Does it end up in a write-off?
So we've recognised this as being, I suppose, what we call high-risk debt in terms of collectability. So we do assess that every year as part of the year end, and we make a provision for a potential non-collection. But we actually go perhaps above that. So we've made an estimate of the collectability of that debt based on using just our sort of normal standard processes for assessing the amount of debt that we could collect. But then we've been topping that up through allocating further reserves. So essentially the amount we're holding in arrears, we try and keep roughly about 100% provision against that at the moment. So as we collect that debt, that comes through into our sort of revenue account then, if we improve on that collection rate.
Sorry, I don't quite understand. Are you expecting to get all of the 2.9 million back, or you're actually assuming that a given proportion will not be collected, and if so, what might that proportion be?
Yeah, so we assess, we don't anticipate necessarily getting it all back. So The rate of non-collection we've assessed at around about 40%. So we've made provision for that within our accounts to make provision for that. But we do go beyond that provision as well, and we have a sort of separate reserve to effectively cover off if the collection rate is actually less than that. The issue for us at the moment is that at the moment we have a relationship with a lot of these debtors still through the housing benefit, and the reason we've taken a fairly cautious approach about the provision is that as benefit recipients transfer to universal credits, our sort of connection with them will lessen. And we certainly don't anticipate that DWP will take on any outstanding debts that we've got. So we're just, I suppose, hedging our bets about the potential risk that's down the line when all the claims do eventually transfer onto universal credit.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Tom asked my first question, which was about what the Jungle Drums were saying about employers' size. I mean, I think it'll be certainly above 2.5%, but not as generous as the teachers and the health service. I don't think, because the mechanism, as you rightly said, is different. But I think it will come as quite a shock when it does arrive. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see it 4.5, 5, something like that eventually. But there is some, good news in there. I mean, commercial rents, not quite met the profile, but 96% isn't bad. That's almost 100, and it's only 2% down, I think, on this time last year. Good news about interest rates sort of up, and collection rates have stayed, very, very good and even improved. So, good profiles, I think. So, so the year will unfold. I think interest rates will be interesting as well. Good planning, good profiling, stuff to it. Good.
Thank you. Members, if there are no extra questions, we're asked to note this report of the key financial indicators. So can I take it that the report has been noted and indicate by a show of hands, please? Thank you, members. The report has been noted. So we'll now proceed to agenda item 6, the Treasury Management Annual Report. And this can be found on this item can be found on pages 12 to 23 of the agenda. So please can I invite Mark Jarvis, the Financial Services Manager, to set out the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Now, this is the annual Treasury Management Outcome Report for the 21-22 financial year. For those who are not aware, it's the final Treasury Management Report of the 21-22 cycle. We start off with the Treasury Management Strategy that's agreed as part of the budget. We then have a mid-year report that shows the progress against those targets set at budget, and this is the final one that concludes the 21-22 financial year. The purpose of this report is for committee to have the first look, review and ask any questions prior to the report being presented at full council in October. Now, it is a complex report and gives details around our Treasury Management activity. However, I'll pick up the main highlights. So with regards to the external context, I would say it's been an unusual year, but it feels like we've been saying that quite a bit over the last few years. There's various events that have occurred that has impacted the environment of our Treasury Management activities. So we have seen some volatility in the markets, especially in the last quarter, given the impact of the cost of living, with regards to the conflict in Ukraine, and all these have had an impact on our Treasury Management activities, and not forgetting the COVID restrictions that was at the start of the year, which seems like a long time ago now. So obviously back in March 21, CPI was at 0.7%. We're looking at 11% by the autumn of this year. Ultra low interest rates that we saw at the start of the year has now increased to 75 basis points as at the 31st of March, and obviously that's continued throughout the year. We saw the 15 basis point increase in December, followed by 0.25% increases in February and March in order to combat inflation. Now, despite the volatility in the last quarter, there has been improvement in the credit position. For the most part of 21-22, it was still felt prudent to maintain tight policy in terms of our maximum duration of our short-term investments. However, this eased in the last part of the year, and in December, Arlene Close, our Treasury advisors, recommended changing the duration of our short-term investments from a maximum of 35 days to 100. Obviously, we are gradually doing that depending on the need for liquidity. If I move on to the local context, there's a key table on page 17 that shows the council resources at the end of March. Now, the key point to note here is the increase in our borrowing requirement, which is basically how much borrowing we need to fund our capital programme, and this is measured through an indicator called the Capital Financing Requirement, or CFR, and that's at 22.799 million as at the year end, which is an increase of 964 compared to the previous year. As mentioned, our borrowing requirement has increased, predominantly due to our capital activity, but we have not needed to go out to the market for external borrowing. Now, we've done this by using our cash resources that are planned to be used for other purposes in the future, and obviously we refer to that as internally borrowing. As a consequence of that policy of internally borrowing, that does reduce the amount of cash available for our short-term investments, but obviously, given the low rates, there is no material impact on the yield. In terms of borrowing, we still have the 6 million of debt consisting of 2 lender option borrower option loans, also called LOBOs, and they're worth £3 million apiece. Now, I'm sure members are aware that these loans are kept under review frequently, given the possibility of refinancing or for these loans to be called in by the institute that holds them. Now, as at the 31st of March, these loans weren't refinanced. However, during the year, a significant amount of work was done not only by the council, but by Arlene Close and obviously the Commerce Bank, who actually hold these loans, in order to commence the refinancing. And although it doesn't fall part of the financial year that we're discussing, we have since refinanced that loan, or the 2 loans, but further details will be provided in the mid-year report later this year. Also within the report, the table on page 20 shows our Treasury investments. This shows the balances at the start of the year, what investments were made, matured during the year, as well as the balance at year end. Now, a large amount of activity focused around the Debt Management Office, which basically is UK government, which we have used primarily for security for the basis that we still hold a significant amount of COVID grants, as well as the energy rebates that was announced early in the year. We didn't make any changes in our pooled funds. However, given the funds, the value of these can go up and down, and despite a blip in February due to the conflict in Ukraine, these recovered significantly and resulted in an unrealised gain of 2.9 million compared to a 1.2 million the prior year. To continue the good news, the pooled funds showed a 4.34% return. They exceeded the budget by 147k. Further budget increases have been issued within the MTFS for the current year, 23-24 and 24-25, to get us back to pre-COVID levels. With regards to our short-term investments, obviously given the low interest rates, the return has been low, even despite the 3 increases in the last 4 months of the financial year. Obviously, we'll continue to actually ensure that the funds that we hold are secure, and obviously make sure that we've got liquidity in terms of our outgoings. The final point I'll make is obviously the report also picks up the compliance side of Treasury management. Now, there are a number of indicators that we set as part of the Treasury management strategy, and I can confirm that these indicators have been complied with and have been met. And those were the main points I was going to make. Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. Do any members wish to speak on this item? Councillor Mann?
Well, just to say that we, appreciate the care taken and management measures taken in a period of sort of almost turmoil, and I suspect that it's not going to kind of get any better sort of very very quickly. It might get a deal worse as sort of the year unfolds. I mean, internal borrowings are very useful tool. As you said, it's got an opportunity cost. how much scope is there for more internal borrowing as required?
Well, obviously, we still hold a fair amount of government grants.
Yeah.
So obviously, at some point, we're going to have to repay those. And obviously, at the moment, we don't really have a deadline or indication of when that's going to be repaid, and that will have a significant impact on our amount of cash balances. Obviously, it also depends on the capital programme activity. If there's any slippage, obviously that will continue, but yeah, it does depend on mainly a lot of it depends on the grants that we have to repay.
Councillor Walsh.
I very much endorse David's comments, and we haven't conferred. I noticed you mentioned, and I may have missed something, and again, very, very helpful report and summary. I think you mentioned that there's an additional 147k of income. I mean, given the recent inflation forecasts are 9.4%, and some forecasts have them going to 11%, and who knows where it's going to be beyond that. And perhaps it was in there, but I didn't actually see it. What do we reckon is going to be the net effect for our council? Because presumably we'll get more return from investments, but we'll have some additional costs. I guess maybe more housing defaults and maybe getting harder to get back debts. Do we have a global figure for what these changes might mean? Is it a net positive or a net negative, if my question is clear?
I think so, Councillor Walsh. I think it's very connected to obviously the previous report as well. So obviously the increase in interest rates and obviously the investment made in pool funds, they are doing quite well, and hopefully that will continue. Interest rates rising will help our short-term investments. With regards to cost, in regards to inflation, the cost of living, obviously there's some of the benefits that we're getting from the increase in interest rates can be used to actually mitigate some of that cost. I hope I answered your question there, Councillor Walsh.
Do we have and maybe it's not under your item, but I wonder, do we have a final outcome for what inflation might mean for us if most likely trends continue over the 12-month financial year?
Yeah, Phil's happy to take that for you, okay?
So we are tracking a number of aspects of the inflationary impact. So one being sort of pay. So we're looking at the scenarios there. We've been closely monitoring things like the fuel costs. So we've seen the trajectory of those going up, and we're tracking those in terms of. So we've sort of pulled together a bit of a dashboard that sort of tracks some of the key points. But as has been suggested, there are some pluses and minuses. But I think pay, pay could. Will be a big factor on that. And at the moment, I think we're looking at the net negatives at the moment. But I think, there are I think there's still some unknowns that we're just trying to sort of get some clarity on. But we are tracking different aspects of our budget. I mean, we're seeing, another positive areas in recycling income, where we get income on dry recyclate income, and we've seen prices there going, really high, and that's linked to the oil. But conversely, we're seeing our fuel costs going up, and that. So there are sort of pluses and minuses that we're trying to track through. And as we start to develop the sort of budget, the sort of budget context for the 23-24, we'll start to bring some of that information forward about what our assumptions are and what that actually means in terms of the budgeting.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that's reassuring, and I'm not surprised that the dashboard, but I think you were saying, Phil, that on current parameters, and it's very early in the financial year, and markets and other costs are unstable, but you're thinking it might lead to a net negative overall, but we're covered for the range of abilities. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I mean, if you take, you sort of look at different scenarios and you say, well, if it comes out of this on that item, we think it's going to be this, and like I say, there are pluses and minuses at the moment. If you take a sort of, I suppose, a mid case or a central case, we're looking at probably a net sort of impact to us. But I think this is going to be a developing piece, over the coming weeks and months that will flow through in terms of the budget process. So we'll see exactly how that is playing out. I mean, we're fortunate, in the current year, we do hold, a good level of balances that we can cushion some of that. So if we need to start taking action to address any negative impacts, then, we can do that in a sort of a planned and approach rather than having to sort of take some knee-jerk reactions.
No, thank you. Councillor Eusden.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure if this is Mark or Phil or a mixture of both. Just do we have a feel for how our performance overall so far is measuring up to similar sized councils around us? Are we doing better than them, worse than them, about the same, or don't we know? Thanks.
I'll take this one to start with, and if Phil wants to come in, by all means. There's a table in 7.7 that has the benchmarking, which shows similar size local authorities from our employers as well as all their clients. And obviously, given our investment in pool funds, our return is significantly higher than other authorities. But obviously, with those pool funds, there is risk of where's the rewards. So in that basis, we are doing fairly well because of that investment. As you can see, there's also on the table, it shows obviously how many days we have an investment, and actually has the pool funds volatility, which I think is quite key. So obviously for the 31st of March, it's 8.2%. But obviously similar local authorities about 3.2%. And look at the total return, as of the 31st of March, was at 4.94%, which obviously includes the market value of pooled funds compared to similar local authorities or all unenclosed clients.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to add, actually, and Councillor Mann's comments, that given the turbulent times that we've seen over the last couple of years, and even early on this year, as you mentioned, just the thanks to the officers and yourself for pulling together this, because it just gives a lot of reassurance. The figures are looking positive, and it looks like you've certainly got your fingers on the pulse, and you're ready to make amendments where necessary and put measures in place. So, thank you for all that hard work that you've been pulling together. If we have no further questions, we are asked to recommend submission of this report to the full council. So, could I please have a proposer to move the recommendation? Councillor Eusden, and a seconder, Councillor Mann. So, thank you. Could I please have? So, I have a proposer with Councillor Eusden, a seconder of Councillor Mann, and hopefully Councillor Walsh will be in. So thank you very much. So that is unanimous. We'll now move on to agenda item 7, the strategic risk register. So the report for this item is set out on pages 24 to 52 of the agenda. Please can I invite Phil Myers, Head of Finance, to set out the report.
So I won't spend too much time on this report, because I think members will be aware that we had quite a good member development evening on the strategic risks back in May. So the risks have been reviewed by Management Board and also by the wider corporate management team. And as I said, then there was quite a good discussion and debate about the risks at the member development evening. There are some changes that have been made that were proposed to the strategic risks that are detailed in the report, and those were highlighted at that member evening, and I think that was accepted. They were reasonable in light of the circumstances that we were in at the current time. So I think really it's just whether there are any questions on the report, Chair. Happy to take those.
Okay. Yeah. Before I open it up to members, I was at the members' meeting, and I have to say it was a very useful meeting. I suppose the question is, it's not necessarily regarding the report, but more the discussion around that. Is that something that officers plan to enable to happen in future years as well?
Yeah, yes. I mean, it seems to be a regular slot on the member development programme, so it's been run in that way for a number of years now.
Good. Yeah,
I think we just missed maybe the last year, possibly, or what? we might have missed one year because of the COVID, but I think it's been pretty regular.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. No, do any other members have any questions? Councillor Mann.
Well, just to applaud the fact that members are engaged in the exercise, and that officers are very open to that sort of happening, so it does become a corporate sort of venture. I did miss this evening this year, but I sort of read the reports on it and I looked at a bit of it, and you certainly did do it justice. And I mean, the three changes were, I think, very, very, very sensible, and I think it's a good document.
No, thank you, Councillor Mann. So we are asked to note and endorse the Strategic Risk Register and the action plans for managing high-rated risks. Can I take it that the report has been noted? Sorry, Councillor Walsh, have you got...
Sorry, could I ask a couple of questions, if I may?
Oh, yes, sorry, I'll come back to you. So, Councillor Walsh.
Well, I think this is particularly impressive and well done, and I've got a bit of experience in this way from previous professional roles. Just a couple of thoughts or queries, and they're not so much concerns, it's just for elaboration. On risk B2, economic development, it talks about changes in local unemployment and Brexit and COVID consequences. And given that we get significant investment from both investment and property, and it mentions the labour market and vacancies, and I think particularly in our area, retail, etc. I mean, I imagine there's only so much we can do as a council, but do we keep an eye on the level of vacancies in retail and commercial, and also on any possible changes in business rates or occupancy rates that could have consequences for our business rate income?
Okay. Phil, are you able to take that one?
I think in terms of the occupancy of commercial and the like through the bit, I'm sure economic development are sort of on that, but I would need to take that back and get a response on that. With business rates, again, we sort of I suppose we see that from the point of view of collection, so we can sort of see that through the amount of business rates that we are collecting at the moment. The level of void impact on business rates is not out of sync with what we've experienced in previous years. So we've not seen necessarily a significant impact yet in terms of occupancy issues on business rates.
Okay.
Also, Suzanne Bennett, our Corporate Director, would like to come in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Currently, there's some work being done with SQW, who are a consultancy firm, who are refreshing effectively our economic growth strategy. And one of the kind of the factors that they've identified is the very low rates of unemployment in the district, which on the one hand is great, but on the other hand is a clear indicator of labour market restriction. So our economic growth team are really aware of that, and that is being fed through into that strategy and will be tracked through that strategy, and the ability that we have to control that. Obviously, that sits as a regional and a national policy concern as well. There's some levers that have to be done on a UK basis to address some of those labour issues, but it will be tracked through the strategy and mitigations put in place through that strategy as best we can.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Suzanne. Councillor Walsh, just to come back to you, do you have another question?
If I may, a last
fine.
question, because I've got a bit of a background in planning, and not to go into detail because this isn't the appropriate place, but given the adoption or the expected adoption subject to legal challenge in the next full council meeting of the local plan, in terms of B2, the planning and delivery of housing, given government policy has changed and we don't quite know what the new policy is, the report correctly identifies that we're actually quite close to the number of the 5-year housing delivery target. So I'm sort of, and we don't know what government policy is going to be. So, and perhaps it's not so, but the thought occurred to me, and we get pressure from developers, including on unallocated sites, whether or not you call it speculative development. But say for every new 1,000 houses that actually come about, never mind all the arguments, once the arguments are settled, for every, say, 1,000 new houses that are approved in Braintree, I mean, there are infrastructure consequences and add-on costs for us, the public facilities that need to go to resource them. Sometimes some people argue that there's under-delivery there, but that's a national issue. But is there a net consequence that additional housing costs us more expenditure across the piece with our Braintree district functions?
I suppose, yeah, I'm happy to go to Phil in a moment. I think you raise a good point there. I think I know there was the garden communities that was proposed that maybe would have brought quite a lot of infrastructure with a lot of housing. However, we're not in a position to be able to move forward with that. So that may also be a good question for full council on Monday, because I think there'll be appropriate people to be able to answer that. But I think Phil may be able to elaborate on that at this point as well. Thank you.
Well, I think probably is a question to be, to maybe council. But I mean, I'm happy to go back to planning on that. I think in terms of the recent information around government on the levelling up and regeneration bill, I think there's some recognition in there about infrastructure and changing the way that infrastructure is funded in relation, because a lot of it's through Section 106 at the moment, which is not particularly necessarily effective. So I know that there are sort of proposals around changing how infrastructure is addressed and funded, but I think the specific question might be better.
Oh, I'd certainly do that, and if there's anything you can get from planning, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Coming back to Councillor Mann, thank you.
Well, as a comment, of course, the sort of council tax base goes up with the housing. We don't get much of it because we send it all off to sort of police, fire, and Essex County Council. But your question is, are the extra costs greater than the base right in council tax, and that's a matter of debate. Some say it does cover everything, and there are sceptics like yourself and myself who say it doesn't. But it is an incredibly difficult thing. There's so many variables. It's very, very difficult to, in fact, have a definitive answer. There have been all sorts of studies coming to different conclusions. So, but it's a good question to ask.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't make it full council, but I'll look at viewing from abroad somewhere and see what the response is. So, are there any other questions just before we move on? So we are asked to note and endorse the strategic risk register and the action plans for managing the high-rated risks. Can I take it that the report has been noted and endorsed? So please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you, members. The report has been noted and endorsed. So the recommendations have been approved. I will now proceed with agenda item 8, the internal audit, including progress against the internal audit plans 2021 to 22 and 2022 to 23. The report is set out on pages 53 to 65 of the agenda. So please, you've been very patient, Angie, but can I invite Angie, our Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out her report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So as Councillor Wrench said, this is the progress against last year's plan and this year's plan, which is appearing later on tonight's agenda. Appendix 1 gives the summary of progress against the plan for last year, and Appendix 2, the progress to date in respect of the current year's plan. Appendix 3 provides a summary of the outcomes of the audits which have been completed since the last report to this committee. Paragraph 3.1.4 summarises issues impacting on the work of the team, and that includes a significant proportion of my time is spent on insurance-related work. Paragraph 3.2.1 just confirms that there were no Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and Investigatory Powers Act applications. There were no applications in the current year or to the date of producing this report and since the previous report to this committee. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Angie. Do any members have any questions? Okay, so we don't have any questions on this report. No, Mr. Councillor
Did have one. It's one we've asked before. You know, I mean, it's a capacity issue regarding yourself. You're doing all this fraud and insurance stuff. Do you feel you've got enough space to do your day job, your main job? Would you prefer more resources to be given to your role?
I'm sure I wouldn't be alone in saying that more resources would be good. We do obviously look at ways of mitigating the impact. So, for example, when it comes to talking about the internal audit plan, there are some aspects of the work planned which I'm looking to draw in external expertise to assist us with. But for the purpose of the reporting to this committee, we need to recognise that the other work that we do does impact on our ability to develop in some aspects of the internal audit work. We will be procuring an external quality assessment later in the year. This is a requirement under the public sector internal audit standards to be conducted at least once in every 5 years. So that will give you some independent assessment on how well the internal audit service is functioning.
I do have a question myself. On page 62, it refers to the manager's self-service part of the audit, which currently sits at limited assurance. What do you think would make that possibly become significant assurance or full assurance? Are you confident that that will have that soon? And what timescale do you see that happening within?
I see no reason to believe that there won't be a positive response from the council on this. We're obviously talking to colleagues about the issues that we've identified in the report and proposals for mitigating any risks that have been identified. So we're waiting for those management responses at the moment, but as I say, I'm confident that they'll be resolved.
Okay, no, thank you. Councillor Euston.
I couldn't let one of these go past Angie without raising a question for you. But unfortunately, you've headed me off at the pass, and my favourite area of significant insurance and so on, you've got them all almost into significant. So you've left me nowhere to go, so well done.
No. So we were asked to note the progress and performance against the internal audit plans 2021-2022 and 2022-23. Can I take it that the report has been noted, and please indicate by a show of hands? Okay, thank you, members. The report has been noted and endorsed. I will now proceed to agenda item 9, the internal audit annual report for 2021-22. This report is set out on pages 66 to 81 of the agenda, and again I'll be inviting Angie Mitchell to set out her report.
Thank you, Chair. So the work that we were talking about under the previous report contributes to the annual internal audit opinion. The opinion provides the Council with an independent source of evidence on the design and effectiveness of systems of internal control, risk management and governance. And the report summarises the work undertaken by internal audit during the year 21-22 and to the date of producing this report, and provides the rationale for the resulting audit opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the framework of internal control, risk management and governance. The report includes a statement on conformance with the public sector internal audit standards and the results of the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme. So Appendix 1 is the annual report itself. The background element covers relevant legislation, standards and guidance. Paragraph 3, Section 3, defines the role of internal audit, the reporting lines for internal audit at the Council, and confirms that I have had no restraints placed upon me and no impairments to independence and objectivity in the last year. Paragraph 3.4 summarises the elements that the assurance opinion is based on. Section 5 gives the overall opinion, which is generally adequate with improvement required in some areas, and there's more detail in that box and in the report generally. The opinion is submitted for inclusion in the annual governance statement, and it reflects my view on the current state of the internal control environment and the effectiveness of the current systems of internal control. Impacts of other items such as COVID are noted, and the paragraph 5.3.2 summarises other activities which contribute to the opinion. Paragraph 5.3.3 goes on to note other sources of assurance that have been considered, and paragraph 5.4 summarises that the standards require me to that where I have responsibility for matters beyond internal auditing, that these are periodically highlighted to you for review. So obviously that confirms the other areas of responsibility being insurance and fraud. Paragraph 6.2 summarises matters affecting the resources available for completion of work, and a summary of the outcome of the audit work. Obviously you get reports as they're completed, you get an update to each committee meeting, but this gives a summary of the audits falling within the different categories of assurance. Additional work that was completed is also noted. A summary of the assessment of internal audit performance is in section 7. Chair, those are the key things to draw your attention to, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Angie. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Walsh.
Just one, and again, thanks for the report. In section 5, you summarised 28 audit reviews, and that there were 2 were assessed of limited assurance, and that action is underway to address the weaknesses. I mean, can you possibly say a little bit about what those were and what were the weaknesses? Is there anything that we ought to know a bit about?
Yes, certainly. So if you refer to paragraph 6.4, it gives a little more detail on the 2 audits, which were the manager's self-service, which Councillor Wrench... manager's self-service, which Councillor Wrench commented on in respect of the previous report to this committee, and project realisation of benefits. So paragraph 6.4 gives a little bit of background on each of those 2 audits.
And you're happy that the weaknesses will in fact be addressed, that the trajectory of minimising the weakness is going to be achieved, yeah?
So for both of those, we're waiting for management responses to the recommendations included in the reports. But again, I've got no reason to think it won't be anything but a positive response from the council.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Do any other members wish to speak on this item? No. Okay, thank you very much. So, as there are no further questions, we are asked to note and accept the Internal Audit Annual Report for 2021-22. Can I take it that the report has been noted and accepted? And please indicate by show of hands. Thank you, members. So this report has been noted and accepted. I will now proceed to agenda item 10, the annual governance statement for 2021-2022. So this report is set out on pages 82 to 99 of the agenda, and I will re-invite Phil Myers to set out this report.
So this report then really is to do two things really. It's to evidence that we've conducted a review of the council's effectiveness around its systems of internal control and governance, and also to seek the committee's endorsement in terms of the actual statement, which will then, assuming the committee agree, would then go on and be formally signed off by the leader of the council and the chief executive. So the statement is, whilst the statement is for the 21-22 year, it is something that needs to be up to date at the time it's actually formally published, and it will be actually formally published as part of the statement of accounts for that year. So given that the audit for those accounts has not yet started, there is the report does seek delegation to make changes to the governance statement if that's necessary as a result of the work of the auditors once they conclude their work. What I would say is once the audit has been completed, the statement of accounts will come back to this committee for formal approval, so that we'll have then the updated final version of the annual governance statement in it, and you'll be able to consider the accounts and the AGS statement alongside the BDO's, the external auditor's audit completion report at that time. So the actual review to compile the statement is drawn from a number of sources, one of which was the annual audit report, which Angie has just sort of presented. It also draws on statements from our senior managers. We also do a check against the Cipher Solace framework for governance, and that sort of benchmarking against the core principles are set out in the statement on pages 87 to 91 under the sections A to G. So each one of those are principles that have been defined by Cipher and Solace as for governance framework, and we do sort of commentary against those in the statement. The statement also includes some commentary around the impact of the COVID situation, so that clearly impacted on the council's operations and some of its governance arrangements, particularly around things like meetings, but also our involvement in COVID and providing support to communities, etc. So that was still a continuing theme during 21-22, so that's referred to. The sort of meaty part of the statement is in the section 4, which sort of picks up about the review of the effectiveness of our governance framework, and that draws then on a number of areas of the council's work. Some of that is what you'd call business as usual, so the sort of normal performance reporting that we have in terms of both financial and non-financial that goes through to our cabinet on a quarterly basis, but also some of the reports that are done as part of the budget process. So the Section 151 officer has to make certain specific reports around the robustness of the budget and the adequacy of our balances. It also makes reference to the work of our scrutiny committees. So and they have a programme of work that's undertaken, and how some of that work is then picked up and reported on to Council. There's reference to the sort of process around the complaints under the Members' Code of Conduct, so something that we have, relatively small number on, but nevertheless we have that process and procedures in place for that, and those are referred to in that review. The work of this committee is also referenced, so this committee receives a number of regular reports around the internal control framework, the work of our internal audit section, the external audit, and risk management, as we've received this afternoon. It also makes reference to some of the work that the external auditor is doing, and I think it'd be fair to say at the moment we're not necessarily in the most ideal position. 1920 accounts have not yet been signed off as of yet. There is a national issue around how councils account for infrastructure assets, which is causing a little bit of a delay on getting those over the line. And the 2021 audit, although a lot of work has been done on that already, clearly the auditor has not yet formally reported back to this committee on that. So, but nevertheless, we've had the audit completion report on the 1920 audit, and and we're not expecting any major changes from that. It makes reference to the fact about the council's, reviewing its strategic risks, and we've picked that up on the agenda about the process there, and also about some of the external inspections that are undertaken on some of the council's activities, so health and safety, executive, the DVSA. We've just had a recent report done on the council's operator licence compliance. We've regularly reviewed the cyber security capabilities, and we get assessed for the public sector network compliance as well. And it also makes reference there to the work of the local government ombudsman in dealing with complaints that have been made against the council. So that review also then draws on, as I say, the work that Angie does as part of her annual audit review, and the conclusion that she has drawn in terms of our internal control arrangements and governance arrangements. In the statement last year, there were a number of areas that were identified as government issues. So the statement picks up those and provides a commentary about some of the actions that we've already taken on those. So the first one being around the conduct of meetings. So, during COVID, we had virtual meetings going on, and then the regulations for those ended. So we've had to address how we deal with meetings going forward, whilst there was still a risk around COVID. And so that's set out in the table on page 95. We also had the issue about the increased remote working and the impact that would have, and again the statement describes some of the various aspects of how we've addressed that. So hybrid home working policy and guidance has been drafted and issued to managers, along with some of our established policies and that, etc., around remote working that we've had in place for a number of years. It also makes reference then to the impact that was on the audit. So some of the work that audit had planned to do had to be deferred because of the priorities around COVID, and so it makes reference to how that was now subsequently being picked up in the audit planning for subsequent years. Also around some of the work that's been done on some of the COVID grant schemes. So we're in a period now where there's an awful lot of post-payment assurance reviews going on, and as well as our revenues team that are involved in that work with the relevant government departments. Our audit team have also been involved in that. So it's section 5, it's on page 97. There's just a general assurance then statement. So based on that review, it's suggested that we do have good overall assurance that the council's governance arrangements are sort of remain fit for purpose, despite the modifications that we've had to make for some of the issues around the pandemic. It then also looks at some of the perhaps emerging issues that we've got going forward. So we've got the cost of living and inflationary pressures, and members will be aware that at the last council there was a motion that agreed to establish a new sort of joint scrutiny committee to look at that area and its impact in terms of the residents of the Braintree district. There's still got the uncertainties around government funding, so we're keep hearing some mixed messages around the future of government funding at the moment, whilst there are sort of changes going afoot in terms of the political establishment at the moment. We've still got a piece of work to do around the Cipher financial management code. So this, again, is a piece of work that's had to be sort of deferred whilst we've sort of concentrated on a lot of the extra work through the pandemic. So this code is sort of looking at the financial management and resilience arrangements of the council. So we will need to do a formal sort of assessment or benchmark against that code. I would anticipate we will comply in many aspects, but I'm sure there will be aspects where we can improve, and that will sort of develop into an action plan. And then we're also looking at how the council works just generally through a piece of work that's been done around agile and flexible working, which again it may have impacts around some of the aspects of how the council works and the governance and performance management frameworks. So I think the conclusion is that the council does have in place strong governance arrangements, and that we will continue to take steps to address where we can improve on those. So I think the recommendations to this committee are, if the committee agree to approve the governance statement and to approve the delegation, but as I said, that will be on the basis that the committee will receive a final version back anyway of the annual governance statement when the statement of accounts for 21-22 are brought for your approval.
Thank you ever so much, Phil. Another very detailed report, one of many that we've seen this evening. Just before I open up to members, I think the assurance statement on page 97 is very welcome. It's great to hear that there's a good overall assurance that we've remained fit for purpose. Again, echo what I said earlier, the last couple of years have made that job probably incredibly more difficult than what you could have ever imagined. But what I would like to ask questions on page 98, you mentioned the Agile and Flexible Working Group. Firstly, kind of who's been pulled together from across the organisation to be represented on that, and then what do we determine as the emerging risks linked to that, and what knock-on effect could that have for the council? Because there's clearly benefits of being agile, but I'd be interested to know what could be the more side of the risks and how that could impact financially as well. So would Suzanne be the best person to ask?
I was to say, you've got the ideal person.
Okay, no, thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'm the lead sponsor for the Agile and Flexible Working piece. I would say that agile and flexible working is much wider than hybrid working. Hybrid is just part of that. We're looking at how we can move the workforce forward into the 21st century, and so that we're able to be agile to other changes that might come. Obviously, we've been through a massive shock, but we know that that's probably not the last shock that's coming. We're in a volatile time, and we need our workforce to be able to flex and work in different ways, even just with the changes in technology. You know, who knows what someone's kind of beavering away on at the moment somewhere in Southern California that's going to revolutionise the way we work. But the underlying these pieces of work, there are some fundamental principles that we have to ensure are protected. So there's some things around customer service, for example, that, you know, we have to ensure that customer service is maintained and good governance is maintained. So it is a key part of the project that we will be considering. I think that a lot of the risks around agile and flexible working have kind of been addressed through the switch to hybrid that the organisation managed sort of very, very quickly in that immediate crisis period. And so we're aware of sort of the IT risks, and, you know, we've flagged that, referring back to earlier items on the agenda. You know, that's flagged around there. And we know, you know, as the weather kind of changes, there's been issues that people have had with electricity and things like that, that also is a risk we have backup. Generation power here, for example, but I personally don't have a generator at my house if the power goes down. So these are risks that we do have to think about and be a bit more creative, I guess, and it's a bit more about individual teams thinking about how they manage that risk. In some cases, it's going to have to be managed more locally than organisationally, and thinking about what the role of the manager is, which is a key part of agile and flexible working. As well, that you know, you're doing stuff that fits to your team, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. But yeah, to give assurance, we are absolutely considering those risks as we go through. We're sort of in the beginning stages of that project, but yeah, we can come back and speak to this committee and give some more assurances as we get through the process, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be really good to have some feedback on that and to hear it at this committee if possible. But no, thank you for that overview. It's quite fascinating, really, because again, even the heat wave this week probably had impact, and being able to react and maintain the services that the council has to is a challenging role to be able to provide. So no, thank you for heading up that and for providing that answer. So.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing I'll just put in that you did ask me as well that I didn't answer was about who we're speaking to in the organisation. And that's the other piece with the agile and flexible working, is this isn't just about people that are based here at Causeway House. We're talking to everybody, talking to ops and talking, you know, it's that whole thing about work's something you do, not somewhere you go. Obviously, if you are out on the carts, you have to kind of go with them, because we haven't worked out a way of doing that remotely as yet, but you never know. That might be what they're working on. In Southern California, but we want to make that, it is that thought process and that culture that we want to embed across the organisation. So we will be engaging quite widely, and we also will be engaging with members on what you need around space and the way that you kind of engage with us. So watch this space, something will be coming out very soon.
No. And I know automation is something that I think is going to be by 2030, they say that a lot of jobs could be automated. So that's what they might be working on in Southern California. But I think I look forward to the day where robots are collecting my rubbish at the end of the road. But you've still got to have workforce to back up if they fail.
Yeah,
so it's something to think about. But members, do we have any other questions on this report? Councillor Walsh and then Councillor Mann.
My question is partly for information and also in terms of policy, so it may cross a bit between Phil and Justin, and maybe other councillors might want to comment. I mean, and by the way, you know, I've no issues about the governance in the financial area and stewardship of public funds. I believe from looking at this and Appendix A that the codes include the code for members and members' conduct. That's correct, isn't it?
That's how I read it as well. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, and I'm not making assumptions here, but I'm just wondering, am I right in thinking that if there are issues, policy or more wider issues beyond any one complaint, say against members, that would go to the Standards Committee? Ultimately, is that part of the remit of the Standards Committee?
Any officers able to answer that? I can't provide you with an instant answer to that one, but I could we could give you a written answer on.
I have asked governance team,
Yeah.
because I'm on the standards committee, and to the best of my knowledge, since I've been elected in May 2019, it's not met, and I think governance indicated to me that the complaints are dealt with individually, and it only meets if it needs to meet. But therefore, my question is, that's context.
Yeah.
So I have asked that question. My question is anywhere in the organisation, is anybody making a note? You said a small number, Phil. Is anybody making a note of the number of complaints against councillors, whether there's anything there, i.e. conclusion, the complaints, is the merit, or have they all been rejected? And if they haven't been rejected, I certainly wouldn't be expecting names, but, you know, how many, outcome, and any resulting action? Because I don't know if anybody's looking at this. There's maybe nothing to see, but I would imagine in a large and complex organisation, and I'm talking about members here, you know, and at times we're dealing with different interpretations of policy, and it's indeed controversy, and standards of behaviour towards members of the public, never mind with each other. I'd just be interested as to what's going on, if anything, and what do we know?
Okay, no, if you're happy with that, Councillor Walsh, what I can ask is possibly Jessica to coordinate with the officer, Kim Cole, and we'll see if we can get you a written response and some information on that, okay?
Okay.
Would that be useful for you?
It would be, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Unless anybody else can say anything. But yeah. I've sort of touched on it, and I haven't really got much of a reply. And there may not be anything to see, but I'd just like, in terms of transparency and process, to know, do we keep an eye on these things?
Yeah.
I'll take that away, Councillor Walsh, and speak to Kim Raymer about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say it is the monitoring officer, so it would be Kim who does deal with those complaints and that. So
yeah.
Yes,
okay,
it will be
right.
Kim who will be best placed.
No, I'll ensure that you get a response to that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks a lot.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we can say that we've got a strong governance arrangement. I don't think that's overclaiming. I think it's an honest report that you know, to suggest that it's, you know, not perfect. There is room for improvement. I'm interested in the sort of the flexible and agile working. I wonder if there's any cost in terms of loss of, you know, feeling of belonging, corporacy, and whether that has an actual impact on productivity. I personally would expect that to happen, but that's because I've been conditioned by the way in which I've worked over the many years. So I mean, that obviously be something that you'll factor in there to see whether there is a loss of ethos, for example. You miss something culturally because you're not, meeting together as an entity as often as you would. I know there are different viewpoints on this, and I've had different views expressed to me by staff within the building. But it will be an interesting exercise anyway. But I do think you've got to be careful of the possible costs. And there was one other question that did occur to me when you decide that sort of some process of investigation or review is not possible and has to be deferred. What's the process for coming to that decision? And are members involved in any way at any point? Or is it simply a management decision that you haven't got capacity for, therefore that piece of work has got to be put off until next year or maybe the year after. How was the decision come to? How was the decision made that it's going to be deferred? Has to be deferred.
I suppose there were two parts to that, but Phil, would you like to pick up the second part of the question and then maybe going back to you around the working party that you're leading?
Yeah, so I think in terms of some of the reviews, and I think I mentioned some of the audit work that had to be deferred because we had to make priorities. So, yeah, some of that, it would be an assessment from management to do, and Angie as well, in terms of the resources and the priorities that she needs to make in terms of directing the audit work. But I think in terms of how that then is reflected, so that would then be reflected through in the reports that Angie brings to this committee in terms of the internal audit activity, and in terms of progress against the audit plan, and in terms of them planning for the following year, part of that review will be looking at, well, what work did we have to defer, and we're going to try and pick that up in the new audit plan. So,
And Suzanne, if you had any comments on Councillor Mann's thoughts at the start of that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Absolutely agree. Building culture in the new world is going to be different, and we're going to have to work on it in a different way because people will be in different places at different times, and I think people will have to put more effort into it than perhaps we used to. Kind of, because you were in the building, you kind of consumed the culture without even realising it, but now we actually have to kind of purposefully make that happen. As with lots of things, I guess it's about that balance, isn't it? That we do have different people. One of the pieces we are striving to do with this working group is to gain engagement across the employee body and give everybody the chance to have their voice heard, which I think is really important, because some people are in different places with how this works, and we need to balance the business need also with them. We spoke earlier, again, we're kind of nicely echoing back some of the stuff I was speaking about earlier about the very low unemployment rates, and there is a recruitment squeeze nationally at the moment and in Braintree, and we're beginning to see it ourselves of how do we attract people. And we know from the research that we've done, just the desktop research that we've done, that to attract people in, you have to offer an element of flexibility and flexible working now. And so we don't want to be we need to balance that piece too of attracting those younger workers in particular, who do, I think, probably suffer more from the cultural loss. But the research shows that they absolutely wouldn't consider working for an employer that didn't offer an element of flexible working. So it's quite a complex piece to kind of please all the people all the time. So we'll have to make our best bash of how that works for us as an organisation. But I guess in short, I absolutely agree that we will need to spend more time as an organisation thinking about how we come together and how we manage to maintain our culture. And being a new person into the organisation, it has a great culture, and I wouldn't want to see that lost.
Okay, thank you. So if there are no further... sorry, Angie would like to come back.
Sorry, whilst you were just talking, I just checked back. Councillor Walsh raised a question about complaints. The Monitoring Officer annual report comes to this committee once a year and was last presented in October 2021. So the next committee meeting we have will hopefully include the latest update, and that does include, my screen's just gone, an assessment of determination of complaints. So that may go some way to answering your question.
That's very helpful, thank you. And if I looked back at the nearest committee meeting for this committee to October of last year, I can find that. Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Angie. That's very helpful. Thank you. So we are asked to approve the annual governance statement for 2021-2022 as set out in Appendix A prior to it being signed by the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council, and also give delegated authority to the Head of Finance to make any required amendments to the annual governance statement prior to its submission with the Statement of Accounts. So please can I have a proposer to move the recommendations? Councillor Mann, thank you. And please can I have a seconder? Councillor Eusden, thank you. So the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I will now put this to the vote. So all those in favour, please indicate by show of hands. Thank you. That is unanimous. The recommendations have been approved. Thank you, members. I will now proceed to the last agenda item, 11, Internal Audit Plan. Members, the report of this item has been set out on pages 100 to 116 of the agenda, and I will invite Angie Mitchell to set out her report.
Thank you, Chair. So we spoke previously about the annual governance statement, and the work of the internal audit team is a key source of assurance for you in helping you decide whether to recommend the annual governance statement for signing by the Chief Executive Leader. So the public sector internal audit standards require me to establish a risk-based plan to determine the priorities of the internal audit activity consistent with the organisation's goals. So the plan is set out according to the strategic risks and linked to each of the corporate priorities. So you'll see that in the columns within the appendix. The covering report details the internal audit planning process, and a key part of that is talking to senior people across the organisation to get an understanding of their perception of risks and priorities in their areas. The assurance framework is identified in paragraph 3.3, so an assessment is made of different sources of assurance, internal and external, received across the council. You'll see at the start of the appendix a framework model, the 3 lines model. This was developed by the Institute of Internal Audit, and it demonstrates principles of accountability, responsibility for managing risk and assurance, and emphasises the need for strong working relationships and coordination and collaboration between internal audit, management and the governing body. It recognises the contribution of other oversight and evaluation roles in the provision of assurance. So it just provides a bit of an overview as to the other areas that we consider when working on the plan. Councillor Walsh in a previous report commented on the follow-up on the limited assurance report. So included within the plan on page 114, item 44 in the plan, it includes follow-up reviews of limited assurance reports. So for those 2 items, we'll certainly be doing a review again to ensure that the recommendations have been implemented, and we'll report back to this committee. It is a very extensive plan. We will be looking to draw in some external resource to assist with completion of it, and in specialist areas. The plan will be reviewed on an ongoing basis throughout the year. We recognise that we're in a dynamic environment and priorities may change. Other things may come up which are considered to be more important than what we have. But the ultimate aim at the end of the year is to provide sufficient work, sufficient coverage to give you assurance, and for me to give an annual opinion at the end of the year, which contributes to the annual governance statement. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
No. Thank you. Just before I open up to members, it is definitely an extensive plan, but then rightly so for an organisation of this size, and I think it just gives that assurance again that we're on top of what we need to do. And I am pleased to hear that you will be pulling resources in externally for those specialist areas, because that just adds that much needed capacity where needed, so you can focus on the things that we need to do internally. So thank you for that. But members, do we have any questions or comments to make? Doesn't look so. So no, I'll just pause for a few more seconds, just in case. I've had a few last-minute ones tonight that have caught me off guard a little bit. But no, thank you. So can I just ask that we need to endorse this internal audit plan, and draft internal audit plan for 2022-23. Can I just check that this has been endorsed, and please indicate by a raise of hands. Thank you, members. So this now takes me on to agenda item 12, urgent business. We do not have any urgent business, so this item concludes our business for this evening. I will therefore close the meeting of the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee at, I think that's dead on 6 o'clock, so we've done well for time this evening. So thank you, members, for your attendance, and officers also, and to those watching on the YouTube channel. I wish you all a very good evening, and thank you for your attendance today. Thank you.